days after the all-caps Twitter threat to that regime. Joining us now from Capitol Hill, member of the Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committees, Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. Senator, good morning. It's always good to see you. The argument seems to be at this point this morning from the White House that the president was sort of softening the ground with that all-caps tweet to set up a negotiation or a deal. Are you convinced by that argument?
Willie, I'm not convinced. This seems to be the same playbook the president followed over several months with Kim Jong-un of North Korea, where he threatened and threatened and threatened some sort of aggressive all-out nuclear war on Twitter and was increasingly abusive of Kim Jong-un, then did a 180-degree turn, had a handshake photo op summit in Singapore a month ago, which has so far produced no significant outcomes. My concern is that he'll do the same, that he has now very briefly tweeted one all-caps threat at President Rouhani of the Iranian Islamic Republic and will now declare himself capable of concocting some better deal. The Iran nuclear agreement, which took years to put together and relied upon our European allies and China and Russia, isn't something you can replace with just a few tweets and a handshake photo op.
So on both a personal and a professional level, as a United States Senator, when you see a tweet like that one from the president threatening Iran in all caps come across the transom, what's your reaction to it?
I shake my head. I'm concerned. I frankly think we're losing credibility internationally. The more times, the more ways that our president conducts something like diplomacy on Twitter in a way that seems unrelated to the actual reality on the ground, I think it undermines our credibility. His statement at the rally in Kansas City that Iran is now a totally different country is just obviously untrue.
Senator Noah Rothman from Commentary Magazine. Turning really briefly to domestic politics, you recently criticized the left flank of the Democratic Party, saying the Democrats are running a relentless race to the left, and that is a losing proposition, that they need to abandon, quote, wild-eyed proposals. Specifically, what policy proposals do you believe the activist left is pursuing that constitute wild-eyed proposals?
Well, the one that I was talking about there, if I remember that interview correctly, was folks who are my friends and colleagues who think that we should be reversing President Trump's inhumane and unsuccessful immigration policies, and we should be reforming the agency responsible for immigration enforcement. But they summarize that position with #AbolishICE. I think that particular approach is too easily caricatured by President Trump as misrepresenting Democrats as welcoming open borders and abandoning any immigration enforcement. That's not the case in my colleagues with whom I've spoken. They've adopted #AbolishICE as a shorthand way of conveying a more substantial position, which is that we should have strong enforcement, but we ought to do it in a humane way, the opposite of recent immigration decisions by President Trump and recent enforcement actions by ICE.
Senator Coons, it's Casey Hunt. It's nice to see you. I want to turn back to not necessarily foreign policy, but foreign meddling. The president tweeting, kind of rewriting what's gone on with Vladimir Putin, saying that Russia is meddling in the midterm election, but that he's trying to help Democrats. There's been some speculation as to where that information may be coming from, or if he just made it up. I'm wondering, has there been any conversations with you and your colleagues, perhaps those on the Intelligence Committee, or I know you serve on Foreign Services. Is there any truth to this? Any evidence that you've seen?
Casey, on the Foreign Relations Committee, we've heard absolutely nothing that suggests Russia is making an abrupt change in its preferences as it prepares to attack our elections again in 2018. What we've seen across Western Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, is that Russia is a persistent and aggressive adversary of democracy. It is true that in the United States in the 2016 election, Russia took some actions to support both the far right and far left in order to further increase division in America. But our intelligence community unanimously assessed that in the case of the presidential election of 2016, they ultimately made a decision to support Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton and to interfere with, to attack our election to achieve that result.
Senator, speaking of our intelligence community, yesterday you and Senator Flake, not for the first time, attempted to pass a simple resolution in the United States Senate basically saying, we believe our guys are doing a great job, and we believe our guys are better than the Russians. And the senator from Georgia, David Perdue, used a parliamentary maneuver to block the resolution from coming to the floor of the Senate. So my question to you is, what's wrong with your resolution? And if nothing's wrong with your resolution, what's wrong with the United States Senate?
There's nothing wrong with our resolution. It was dismissed last Thursday as mere symbolism, and I'll remind you that sometimes symbolism, like our flag, is an important rallying point for Americans. I think it is important. I believe Senator Flake thinks it's important that the Senate speak with one voice about backing our intelligence community, federal law enforcement, but our resolution also called for action. It called for full enforcement of the sanctions that we imposed against Russia, that we empowered the president to impose against Russia in a 98-2 vote last year, but that hasn't been yet fully imposed. And it called for hearings and for the release of notes and records of the meeting in Helsinki. So it was both important symbolism in terms of supporting the intelligence community and federal law enforcement, and our resolution called for action. What's wrong, I think, with the Senate, particularly with the Republican caucus in the Senate, is that there are some senators unwilling to do even symbolic measures that would be in any way disfavorable to the White House. That strikes me as concerning. You've got senior administration officials who are openly saying the opposite of what President Trump said in Helsinki. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley just said, I believe yesterday, we will never trust Vladimir Putin. If that's the case, then why is he being invited to the White House?
Senator Gene Robinson, you and I have talked. I know that one of your particular interests on foreign relations is the African continent. The only way that I can recall the president has engaged with the African continent is to refer to it as a bunch of asshole countries. So do you find others in the administration who are willing to engage with you on Africa, or do you not?
Well, to be positive, Secretary of Commerce Ross recently led a trip to 4 African countries to try and strengthen and broaden our economic ties with countries that have vibrant economies and where there's significant opportunity. And I think that is an important step forward. At the meantime, China is engaged in very active, very aggressive economic diplomacy across the continent. Xi Jinping is in southern Africa right now and just made a commitment of, I think, $14 billion in new investments in just one country, in South Africa, one of Africa's most dynamic countries with a very promising economy. My most recent meeting with the Minister of Trade of South Africa was a very somber one. Our tariffs against their steel and aluminum exports is going to have a really negative impact on our relationship with South Africa, since they're not really the country we're trying to impact with President Trump's tariffs. That should be focused on the U.S.-China trade relationship. This is just another example, Eugene, of the sort of unintended harm that these wildly applied and widely swung tariffs are having.
I think we hit 4 of the 7 continents this morning with Senator Chris Coons. We'll get to the other 3 on your next appearance, including Antarctica, so please be ready, Senator. Thank you very much. Good to see you.
Thank you, Elliot.
Still ahead this morning, former